Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So, good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce you Dr. Jérôme Ferret from l'École Normale Supérieure. It is going to talk us about probably the most famous and powerful static analyzer that is out there, that is Astray, which he co-authored with Bruno Blanchet, Patrick Enradier-Couzeau, Laurent Bonborn, Antoine Minet, Xavier Rival, and David Mogno. And okay.
Thank you, Francesco, and thank you for having invited me here. So I will give a talk about the Astray analyzer, and my talk is divided into two parts. I will first give a short introduction to the analyzers, and then I will show how we can extend the analyzer with an extra abstract domain, and we will follow the example of digital filterings. So there are software where bugs cannot be accepted because they would be the cause of human casualties or large financial cost. So it is a field of critical software. And in Astray, we want to prove the absence of runtime errors in critical embedded C programs. So there is a need for automatic tools to formally prove the absence of errors. These tools have to be sound, that is, they cover all the potential executions of the software. They need to be efficient, both in accuracy and in times. Accuracy because you need to have a small number of alarms so that we can investigate them manually. And we need to be efficient in time because we want the analysis to be included inside the development process. Okay. And the ultimate goal would be to reach the goal of no alarms, which is a proof of certification that there is no runtime error. So the Astray analyzer is specialized, is tailored to a given family of programs. That is synchronous real-time code that are provided by the same end users and that have been designed following the same development process. So here is the general structure of the program. You first declare and initialize your variables. Then you have a large loop. At each iteration of the loop, you read some volatile inputs. Then you make some computations. You output your, you write your volatile outputs. And then you have an exception, and you wait for the next iterations of the loop. So the properties of interest are runtime errors. That is, you want to prove that there is no division by zero, no access out of the bound of arrays. You want to prove that integer and floating point numbers never overflows. And you have also some user-defined requirements, such as assertions and things like that. So there are some simplifying aspects. For instance, we do not deal with the full C. There is no dynamic allocation in our software, and there is no recursion, neither no backward go-to. So the flow is only forward. There is only this huge loop around the body of the loop. Moreover, the state of the program, so the global variables are all stored into a large data structures, but these data structures keep the same shape along the execution of the program. So there are also some challenging aspects. So at the beginning, we were starting by analyzing a program with 100,000 lines of code in C. And there were a lot of variables because there were more than 10,000 variables. They use floating point computation, so it's not integer and it's not real number computation. So we have to provide some tools to deal with floating point arithmetics. So there are complex computations and we have to prove the stability of them. There is some relation between Boolean and numerical values because the flow of the program is mainly encoded into a Boolean value. So you make a test, you store it in a Boolean, and very later in the program you will take the value of your Boolean, and according to its value you do one thing or one other thing. So there is a very long path between the input and the outputs. So we want another approximation of the reachable states of the program. So for that purpose we need a model. And the model is not designed at the level of the program, but at the level of the language. So it is the semantics. The semantics, which formalize the behavior of the programs in your language, is given by the norm of C and by the floating point number norms. Moreover, we have also some information from the end user about the architecture on which we will run our programs. For instance, we know if they use Little Endian or Big Endian's representations. So it will be useful in the analysis when we make some arithmetics, pointer arithmetics, for instance. Then, when we have a model of the language, we can make an abstraction, and these abstractions relies on a bench of abstract domains, which are a collection of properties we want to handle during the analysis. The abstract properties are also given with some, yes?
Do your input C programs, do they have nested structures and unions and things like pointers and internal pointers and all that?
Yes.
And how do you model the memory? Do you model memory just as a sequence of bytes?
No, we have an abstract domain to model memory, and maybe it. Very shortly. It's not the purpose of the talk, but we have a domain tailored to the abstraction of the memory.
Okay.
That's it. So we have an abstraction that relies on a bench of abstract domains, and these domains come with some operators to simulate the computations of the semantics, but at the level of abstract properties. So we can derive an automatic sound static analyzer that covers all the execution of the program, and it leads to a certification of a program. So we compute an invariant, and from this invariant we check that there are no runtime errors. So I will now give an overview of the history of the ASTRAE project. So it started in 2001, and we were given a very short example of 10,000 lines of code. And we first wanted to do analyzers at scale. So we first worked on algorithm and data structure to make the analysis scale, and we implement non-relational domains such as intervals. We made some very easy first refinements such as constant propagation, things like that, and we succeed in having a quite low number of alarms. Then we were given real applications, and we have to start thinking on how to refine the analysis to certify this new example without losing the scalability of our analysis. Okay. So each time we have a new program, we look at the alarms, we investigate one alarm, we discover that we need some mathematical structure to analyze it, we derive a new abstract domain, and this domain allows us to solve all the class of the alarms that are related with this one. Okay. So we succeed with this refinement process to analyze two families of real-world large applications. So what does ASTRAE compute? It computes an invariant, which is an approximation of all the potential computations of your program. So what is the structure of this invariant? It maps each control point to an abstract properties. We denote the set of environments that can be reached at this program point. This is refined by calling context. So for each program point, on each potential calling context, I have an environment. Okay. The abstract properties is obtained thanks to a collection of abstract domains. And this domain expresses some predicates. In these predicates, there are parts that comes from the programs, but parts that are inferred by the analysis thanks to iterations. So the abstract domain comes with some primitives that allow the computation of them. So we have transfer functions that model the assignment, the guards, and we have also some operators to make extrapolation. So here is how the analysis work. We start from an abstract properties, which is an abstraction for a set of environments, and we want to compute a loop. So we first apply the guard operators to select a subset of environment that satisfy the loop. Then we start iterating by using the transfer function. When we meet a branching, we apply the guard operator on the guard operator with the negation of the test to separate the two cases. We iterate for the true branch, we iterate for the false branch, and we merge the two results. We obtain an abstract properties which is true after the first iteration of the loop. We store this invariant and we redo the iterations. Then we compare the two consecutive results. If the first one is larger than the second one, then it is an inductive invariant, and we have finished. Otherwise, we widen the result we widen the first iterate by the second one to get a higher abstract environment, and we restart the iteration. The widening ensures that this process terminates. So it's an extrapolation of an inductive invariance. So then I will show you a collection. Yes?
There, you always play out all of those paths, or you also compute the join at conditional joins. Like in your diagram, there's a U for union.
Yeah.
Do you compute that union, or do you straighten out each path?
It depends. It depends. To make simpler, we compute it, but sometimes we have some directives that allow us to delay the union. But there's a slide about it later. So we have a bunch of abstract domains. So the first one is a model for describing the memory. So in the memory, we have several concrete cells. And in the abstract, we have some abstract cells. And an abstract cell may be related to one concrete cell or to several ones. Okay? So we have an abstract cell is related to several ones when we want to smash some cells. Because, for instance, if you have a large arrays for inputs, maybe it's not useful to distinguish all of them, so you smash them and you only have one interval, for instance, for each of them. So we also have an abstract domain to deal with memory access that allow to do some pointer arithmetics. Okay. So if you want more detail about them, I can give you a pointer to a paper, for instance, or things like that. So
when you say a concrete cell is a structure, or it's a pointer, like one location? Is it 1 byte?
It is a memory location.
A single byte or a word, a double word?
We have a hierarchy of them, so
okay.
you can access to different levels. So then we have some properties about the values of abstract cells. So we have interval constraints that just give an upper bound and a lower bound to variables. So it is a very common abstraction. It is introduced since 30 years. And it is quite easy to fix the problem of floating point just by tuning the rounding mode in the abstract interpreter. Because at the concrete level, we do not know which rounding mode will be used. So we have to consider the worst case in the analysis. That is, for upper bound, we always round toward plus infinity, and for lower bound, we always round toward minus infinity. So it allows us to be sound with respect to floating point number. And it is a very convenient abstraction because it always allows us to express the properties of interest, such as division by zero, overflows of number. Nevertheless, it's not expressive enough to express all the properties that we need to prove them. That's why we have to use other abstract domains to refine the analysis. So the first example is the octagon domains, which has been introduced by Antoine Minet. So it allows us to give a bound to each expression of the form minus plus x, minus plus y, and it give a bound, for example, here. So let's consider this small example. So we have a variable x, which is between minus 10 and 10. We take the absolute value of x, and we put it inside y. And then we test that y is less than 5. In this case, we make an assertion that x should be between minus 5 and 5. So if we only use intervals, we know that x is between minus 10 and 10. So y is between 0 and 10. But we cannot propagate the information that y is smaller than 5 to get that x is between minus 5 and 5. So we use octagon. And what is happening is that in any case in the branch, we have the information that 0 is smaller than y minus x, and 0 is smaller than y plus x. For this, you just use the assignment and the fact that the test is satisfied or not. Okay. Then using this information is if we inject the fact that y is smaller than 5, we get the fact that x is between minus 5 and 5, and that was the goal. So octagon are quadratic in memory and cubic in time complexity. So it's a reasonable cost for a relational domain. But it is too expensive to relate all the variables of the programs. So we have some strategy to define what we call packs. And a pack is just a set of variables that have to be related by the abstract domain. Okay. So the whole complexity of octagon is linear with respect to the number of packs multiplied by the number of variables per packs, which is bounded by the strategy. So we also deal with a floating point number by abstracting each real expressions, each floating point number expressions by a real expression but using intervals. So each time we make an operation, we compute a bound on the rounding errors and we insert this bound within the expressions. So here is another example of domain. It is to deal with digital filters. So it is the topic of the next part of the talk. So we have some algorithm to smooth the value of some input streams. And we cannot bound the value of the output without having a close look at this algorithm and understanding which invariants are required. And in practice, there is no linear invariance to deal with it. So I will give more details later. We have also some computations that would be stable if they were computed in the real field, but that would diverge slowly in floating point arithmetics. For instance, if you take a value, you divide it by 3 and you multiply it by 3, then the result may be not the same. So in practice, we bound the effect of the loop iteration on each variable by linear functions, and it gives us a bound that depends exponentially with respect to the number of iterations of the loop. So the domains that are used for bounding digital filters on slow diverging progressions use external mathematical theorems that allow us to to reach results that would be out of reach of refinement method, automatic refinement method. So we are the software uses Boolean to encode the flow of the programs. And for instance, here is a short example. We make a test on for the sign of x. We look if it is positive, if it is negative, and we store the two results in some Boolean. And later in the program, we will make a test. If the two Boolean are true, then we pick y is equal to 0. Otherwise, we can divide by x. So in order to prove that there is no division by 0, we have to track a relation between the two Boolean on the variable x. So that's the purpose of decision trees. A decision tree is a BDD. At each node, we can test the value of some Boolean. And at the leaf, we have an abstract invariant that describes the properties of the variables if the Boolean tests are satisfied. Okay. So as for octagons, it raises some scalability problems, since we cannot just put together all the Booleans or to the value. We have to make some packs. So we have strategies to do that. Then sometimes we have to delay the union when we consider a control flow merge. And here is an example. So it arises each time we have to make an interpolation, for instance. So we have a piecewise linear function that we want to evaluate. So we make a scan on an array to know in which case we are. Then the loop allows us to know in which case we are, and we have to make some computations, and we have to look at the next value in the array on the previous one. And if we do not have the relations, so if we make the analysis with interval, we only know that I is between 0 and 2. So we have to evaluate ti plus 1 and ty, and we only know that they are all between 0 and 30. And so we cannot prove that there is no division by 0. But if we push the union later, in each case, we know that if I is equal to 0, we know to evaluate these expressions. If I is equal to 1, we know to evaluate this expression, and it allows us to make a case analysis. So we have a strategy that says that if a value is set during a loop iterations, and later we use it to access inside an array, we have to delay the union after the accesses in the array. So that's how it works. Sorry? Okay.
If at the 1, I could be 3. So I plus 1 is 4, and that's outside the array.
Okay, that's just a bug in the example. So how do we use Astray? So Astray can be used fully automatically without changing the options. Otherwise, you may use the option to decide which domain you use and which domain you disable. You can also fix the iteration strategy and change the thresholds. And you have some option to export invariant and to reuse them. Then on the standard output, you have the invariants, and you also have a list of alarms. And the Astray analyzer can be used in a parallel mode. We also have a graphical interface. So here we use the Astray analyzer to to certify two families of synchronous embedded programs. So the first one are in exploitations, and the second family is in development. Okay. So the first column corresponds to the first one, and the two others to the version in development. So we have acceptable computation times, and we have a full proof of certifications because we have no alarms. So we have proved that if we consider a family of programs, we can design an abstract interpreter which is tailored to this family. And we have very few or no alarms. We have a reasonable resource usage. And this is done because we have specialized our abstract interpreter. So we have made some theoretical advances because we have worked on relational domains. We have worked on how to lift relational domains so that they can use floating point arithmetics. We have made some packing strategy. We have linearized expressions to remove rounding errors. And we have developed also new specialized domains to deal with specific problems that arise in this software. So that's it for the first part.
So do you have any questions for this part?
Yeah.
So you certify this proof of correctness for program. What do you do about compiler or the runtime environment if there is any, etc.?
So
you haven't tried to extend basically this certification that you provide to like compilers, for instance?
you mean you want to certify the assembly?
For instance, yes.
So we have worked about it by Xavier Rival, which start from the invariant for the source and prove that the translation is correct in the sense that it preserves the semantics. So it's not a direct analysis of the assembly code, but it's a proof that the certification, the compilation of it, it's correct.
How do you deal with the environment, the inputs? So usually these kinds of programs don't work if you don't put constraints.
So we have
and inputs can be coming like inputs, and they could also be the result of library calls, for example.
Yeah.
Right?
What we have is only the hypothesis that there is no not a number value in input, and we have a range of inputs. That's all we need to have to prove the fact that there is no runtime errors.
The range of inputs, so you can't have an arbitrary integer.
Some input have no range, but some have, and they are provided by the end user.
I see. But can the user write an arbitrary constraint characterizing the inputs?
No, it can only write range about
Ranges.
variable.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. All right.
Okay, let's go on. So the rest of my talk is dedicated to the design of abstract domain for digital filtering. Okay, so it is divided into several parts. I will first set the industrial context. Then I will show an example. Then I will introduce a concrete semantics, a generic approximation, that is a generic definition for what is an abstract domain. I will instantiate these definitions for the case of digital filters, and I will show some example of abstract domains for digital filterings and a more refined versions. Okay. So we want to prove the absence of runtime errors in critical embedded software, and we notice that digital filtering is widely used in this software. So digital filtering is an algorithm that takes a stream of input, smooths the values, and return a stream of output. So we notice that we cannot achieve the certification of the software without using other properties than linear properties. So we have to think about it and design new abstract domains. So there are several issues. We have to detect the use of digital filterings. So there is two parts. There is the receipt phase and the iteration phase. Then we have to think and to describe a generic way of expressing the invariance that can be used in the proof to prove that the output is bounded. And we have to explain how use this invariant to bound the output stream. So in practice, linear invariants do not work. And there is some problems that are due to the usage of floating point numbers. So there are two cases when floating point numbers occurs. In the concrete semantics first, because complex abstract domain deals with real numbers, so we have to abstract floating point arithmetics with real arithmetics but with intervals. And then when we want to implement the abstract domain, also it works with a real number theorem. Each parameter in the abstract domain is abstracted by floating point number intervals for the sake of the efficiency. So here is a case of study. So I will first introduce my notations. So when I say the variable v is inside an interval, it means that I pick randomly a value in the interval and put it in the variable. Okay. So I have two variables, v and t, that allow to control the control of the program. So the variable v allow to choose, allow to stop the iteration of the loop, and the variable t allow to select between a reset or an iteration of the filters. The variable s denotes the output of the filters. The variable e0 denotes the current input, and the variable e1 denotes the previous input. So when I iterate the body of the loop, either I reset the filters, which comes down to setting the variable s to 0. Otherwise, I iterate the filters. And when I iterate the filter, I define the output as a linear combination of the previous output and the two previous inputs. Then I shift the input so that the current input will be the previous one in the next iterations. So that's a first order filter because at each iteration the next output only uses the current one but not the previous one. So if we want to abstract this by interval, we will compute a sound counterpart to the body of the loop, which comes down to apply this affine transformation. So I take an interval, I contract it, and I add the contribution of the two inputs. We should notice that we have break the cancellation effect between inputs, because when I take in this program, when I am E0, I know that I will be E1 in the next iteration, so there will be some cancellation effect. They are completely abstracted away by this, and I just consider that I make some independent input at each iteration of the loop. So I iterate these functions. I know that I cannot reach an inductive invariant only by iterating, but we have the widening. So the widenings consist in choosing some threshold and just trying the threshold if the function is stable with it. So for instance, here we use as threshold the power of 10. So finally, we get an interval which is stable, and we may refine the solution by keeping iterating the function. So we get a result that is that the output is bounded by 10,000. Of course, we can be a bit smarter and use this very simple theorem to get a better threshold. It just tells us that if we take a value that is smaller than d in absolute value, and if you take a new value which is between a times x minus m and a times x plus m, m should be understood as a bound on the input, then the variable z is less than the absolute value of a times d plus m. And if I have chosen the variable d big enough, it would be stable. Okay. So this theorem gives me a way of computing a threshold which is more precise, and it gives us 2,000, which is better than 10,000. But here we also have abstracted away the cancellation effect, and in practice if we abstract away cancellation effect, we cannot succeed in proving that there are no overflows, because in the programs, the filters are used in cascade, and the output of one filter is the input of the next one. And you cannot afford such a lack of precision. So here is the history-sensitive abstractions that consist in expressing the output as each output as a linear combinations of all previous inputs. Okay, so we can do it. Then we can simplify the result, and it gives us a value which is true for each output. That is that the value of the output is always smaller than 2 times the bound for the input stream plus the bound for the initial output. Okay, so it gives us a very precise result, because it tells us that the output is always less than 2. And so we have to see how we can use these things to build an abstract domain that is as accurate. So here is a little more complex example, that is the second order filters. And in this example, instead of defining the next output as a linear combination of the previous output and some inputs, I use the last 2 outputs. Okay? So E1 is the previous input, E2 the previous input of the previous, S0 is current output, S1 the previous one, etc. So the variable V and T are the same. They allow to choose between an iteration of the filter or a reset of the filter. When I reset the filter, I put all so the last 2 consecutive output and the last 2 consecutive input to the same value. And when I iterate the filter, I just define the next output as a linear combination of the last 2 outputs and the 3 last inputs. Then I shift the variables. Okay. And here we have a problem, because since 1.5 plus 0.7 is bigger than 1, I cannot use intervals, because it will diverge. So what we need is some quadratic form. Indeed, we can relate 2 consecutive outputs by the value of a quadratic form. So we get quadratic inequalities, and check and discover an invariant of these forms. So if my 2 consecutive outputs are tied with these quadratic inequalities, and I pick a new output Z, which is between A times X plus B times Y plus M and A times X plus B times Y minus M, so that is the next output, then I can compute an inequality, a quadratic inequality, that relates Z and X. So the quadratic form is the same. I have just shifted the variables, but the coefficient on the right has been changed by applying a linear transformation upon its square root. Okay. So then, if I have picked the coefficient big enough, I would have got an inductive invariance. Okay. So that tells us if we want to abstract second order filters, we have to look at this quadratic form and take it as a variable of the systems, and then make iteration upon it. So why we have to use a quadratic form? If we look at a candidate for an invariant, so on the x-axis I have put the current output, and on the y-axis the previous one. So the transformation that is induced by the iteration of the filter will contract the shape in one direction, dilate it in another one, and make a rotation. And if we have a linear invariant, a polygon, we will have some problem with the corners. But with the ellipses, we have not this problem, and they are the good shape to look at if we want to bound the outputs. So then we have 3 levels of abstractions. Without relational domains, we cannot bound the output. If we use ellipses, we can bound it by 23. And if we formally expand the filter to express exactly the contribution of all inputs, we can get a better result. So now I will introduce a toy language so that I will define my abstract domain for it. So it's a language where I suppose that there is no more floating point number because they have been abstracted by real number arithmetics with interval coefficients. And I also suppose that array accesses have been solved externally and encoded in the flow of the program. That's it. So I have some variables, v, and I have the expressions are linear form with interval coefficients. What I can do the skip instructions, that does nothing. I can compose my instructions. I can make an assignment, a branching, and I can make a loop. I can only test that a variable is positive for the sake of simplicity. So then I have semantics. Since I have encoding rounding error by using interval, my assignment will be non-deterministic. So the semantic of a program is a function that takes an environment and compute all the set of environments that can be reached after having applied this program according to the choice for picking value inside intervals. So when I interpret the skip instruction, I just do nothing, so I return the singleton. If I compose 2 programs, I just compose the semantics, so I apply the first one, it gives me a set of results, and for each potential result, I apply the second one. Yeah. Sorry. When I interpret an assignment, I pick a value for each interval. I look in the environment what is the value of the variables, and I make the assignment. For the branching, I separate 2 cases. Either my input environment satisfies the test, so I apply the first programs. Otherwise, I apply the second one. For the loop, I have to compute the loop invariant, which is the set of the environments that can be reached just before testing the condition of the loop. This invariant is given by least fixed point definition. So either it is the starting environment, either it is obtained by applying one iteration of the loop, knowing that the test is satisfied. Then, once I have the invariant, I just remove the environments that do not satisfy the halting condition. From this semantic, I can derive a generic approximation. So I want to design an abstract domain. An abstract domain is a set of properties about environment, and each properties denote a set of concrete environments. So the mapping between abstract properties and set environment is given by a concretization function, gamma. Then I have some primitives to simulate the computation of the concrete semantics at the level of abstract properties. So I have a semantics to merge control flow paths. I have an operator to simulate guards, to simulate assignments, and I have an abstract operator to compute the abstraction of least fixed point. This operator takes a function which is a sound approximation of a monotonic operator over a set of environments, and it computes an abstraction of its least fixed point. The abstract counterpart of the operator do not need to be monotonic. The soundness only follows from the monotony in the concrete semantics. To define the abstraction of least fixed point, I use some extrapolation operators such as widenings and narrowing. So we can now define generically the abstract semantic. So since abstract properties handle a set of environments, the abstract semantics is only a function from abstract properties to abstract properties. So the skip operation does nothing. the semantics for the composition of programs is the composition of the semantics. For the assignments, I've got my primitive. Then when I do a branching, I separate the two flow of the programs. I select an abstract environment that contain all the environments that satisfy the guard. I apply the abstract semantics of the first programs. I select an abstract environment that is satisfied by all the environments that do not satisfy the guard, and I apply the second program semantics. Then I merge the two results. For the loop, I just replace each basic instructions by their abstract counterpart. So I have some soundness requirement upon each of my basic operator, and from which I can derive the soundness of the whole analysis. That is, if I start by a concrete environment that satisfies properties, then the concrete semantic of this environment is included in the concretization of the abstract semantics applied to my initial property. Now I will explain how we can deal with filters. So we will make one abstract domain per family of digital filters. So what is a family? A family is characterized by a symbolic descriptions of the iteration of the filters. So these symbolic descriptions comes with several numbers, such as the number of output that is used to define the next output, and the number of consecutive inputs. There are also some conditions over the parameters that occurs in the symbolic description of the functions. So for instance, in the case of the second order filters, I use 2 outputs, 3 inputs. The next output is defined as a linear combination of the 2 last output on the 3 last inputs, and I have a discriminant conditions. Then I will write constraints then that only express that the variables are tied by a filter. That is that they are the consecutive output and input of a filters, and I have a bound on the input. Okay. So I have to relate some variables and some parameters, so that the part that is extracted from the syntax of the program by pattern matching the expressions that iterate the filters. Then I have a part that is dynamically computed by the analysis, and it encodes some abstract ranges. I have a concretization functions that allows me to interpret each of these constraints as a set of environments. So for instance, if we consider second order filters, we can make we can consider the history and sensitive abstractions that just look at the output and will say that I have 2 variables, x and y. There are 2 consecutive outputs of filters. The coefficients are a and b, and I have the size of the ellipse, for instance. So the size of the ellipse will be computed by iterating the body of the loop over these constraints. So here is how we deal with assignments. So it's a synchronous notation. So when I note x, it denotes a tuple of variables that are important before applying the filter. X prime is the tuple of variables that are tied after having applied, iterate the filters. So when I first meet my filter iterations, the pattern matching will tell me that I need some constraint about the tuple of variable x. But since it is the first iteration of the filters, I have no constraint yet. So I will use the others domains and ask them for some information. So it's a kind of collaboration between the domains. So for instance, if I am interested in the second order filter, I will take the interval and close it, build an ellipse that contains the rectangle, for instance. So that is the meaning of the primitive build that is written here. Then I have a constraint that ties the variables in the tuple x, and I can apply my filter. It will give me a constraint for the variables that are in the tuple x prime. Then I will encounter a shift of the variable that will give me back a constraint that tie the variable in the tuple x. And at the next iterations, the constraint is available, so I can just iterate the filter by using my theorems. So then I can loop until the size, the abstract size, is invariant. To deal with filter reset, it is done automatically by looking at control flow merge. When I reset the filters, I have a main pass where the filter is iterated. And because the filter is iterated, I have filter constraints about x prime. But on the other pass, there is no iteration. So when I will merge each control flow pass, I will miss a constraint to make the merge. So when on one pass I have a constraint that is not on the others, I use the others domain to build from scratch a filter constraint. So I use the interval and build the ellipse that contain the rectangle. So for instance, here in this pass, in the first and in the third pass, I have a filter reset. So I use the other domain to build the properties that correspond to the initialization of the filter. So now I will instantiate this framework with the case of the simplified second-order filters. So this is a theorem that allows me to bound the output. So I have included a rounding error inside, but it is quite the same that the one that we have seen in the beginning of the talk. So it tells us that if we have two variables that are tied with these quadratic inequalities in red, and we make an assignment by picking z between a times x plus b times y plus m and a times x plus b times y minus m plus the potential rounding errors, which are linear with respect to the bound on x and the bound of y, then the variable z and the variable x are tied with new quadratic inequalities, and I know how to compute the right part of it. Okay? So that's it. So to build the domain, I know that I have to relate the last two outputs of the filters and the parameters that occurs in the filter, so A, B, and the rounding error coefficients. And the meaning of such constraint is just these quadratic inequalities. When I meet an expression, I will pattern match to see if it corresponds to a filter iterations. And if it corresponds to filter iterations, I know what are the last consecutive outputs. I know which part of the expressions I have to evaluate to have a bound on the inputs. And I know what will be the next variable that will be tied with the constraints. So I can iterate my informations to compute the post conditions for the assignments. So here is the collaboration between domains. So there is two kinds of collaborations. The first one is for the initializations. So when I miss a constraint, how do I build it? So either I have only interval constraints, it gives me a rectangle that, and I build the ellipse that contains these rectangles. Either I also have some information about the equality between variables, and it allows me to build this smaller ellipse. Conversely, when I want to deduce some intervals to refine the others domains, I just enclose the ellipse inside a rectangle. So now I will explain how we can refine a domain for digital filters so that we take into account the history of the computations and we do not abstract away the cancelling effect between inputs. So I take a generic definition of recursive linear filters. So it is in floating point arithmetics. Okay. So the filter, the next iteration is defined as a linear combination of P previous outputs and Q previous inputs. So having a bound on the input, I want to compute a bound on the output. So the first step is to get rid of rounding errors. So we will write the output as the sum of the output if the filter were computing in real arithmetics and the overall contribution of rounding errors. And what helps us is that, the overall contribution of rounding errors satisfies the recursion of the simplified filters. So if we know how to deal with the simplified filters, we know how to bound rounding errors. Then we are left to compute a bound for the filters if it were computed in the real world, real number world. So what we do is that we will isolate the contributions of the last n input. And n is now a parameter, but it will be set later. So we just write the output as a linear contributions of the n previous inputs and a residue. Due to the form of the recursions, the contribution of the n previous input is given by a fixed formula. So it can be computed statically. Then we have to deal with the residue, and the residue satisfies the same recursions than the simplified filters. So it's a way to refine the domain because we exactly describe the contributions of the last inputs, which are the more important, and the others are abstracted using the simplified domain that we have introduced before. So if we were computing in a real field, it's easy to see that our abstractions will give a result that will converge exponentially with the best result. But since we use we use a floating point number to implement our domain, it is not possible. And what happened is we have some parameters and we have to detect the sign of these parameters. And once we are not accurate enough to know what the sign is, instead of converging exponentially, the convergence lose the exponential is inversed and it loses some information. And so we have some experimentations about it, and so we notice that there is this decreasing exponential, and then here the parameters, we do not know the sign anymore, so we cannot increase the accuracy, and instead of increasing it, we have increasing exponential. So we choose n so that it is the biggest n, so that we can detect the signs of all parameters that are involved in the formula. So here I show the contribution of filters domain in the same example that I gave earlier. So it's not the same, it has been done later, so the computation time may be less than the previous slide. So for each program, I run the program without filters domains, with simplified filter domains, and with expanded filter domains that take into account the cancellation effect. So what we see is that the whole analysis time decreases because the space to explore is much small. When we have false alarm and we have floating number overflows, it costs a lot because we need a lot of iteration to pass through the thresholds to reach plus infinity. So if we have a better accuracy, it can lead to a better computation time because the space exploration is smaller. So here we have an example where simplified filters are not enough to prove that there are no floating point number overflows. And in the other case, we can prove that there are no overflows, but expanded filter leads to a small computation time. So we have provided a highly generic framework to deal with digital filtering, and we have instantiated it in the case of linear filters. What I didn't tell you in the talk is that if you have a filter that is not first order or second order, it can be decomposed as a sum of first and second order digital filters, and it requires to factorize a polynomial. Okay? So the case of linear filters are fully handled. If we want to make non-linear filters, there are two problems. First, the problem of rounding errors that is solved here thanks to the linearity of the functions. Then we have some problems of scalability because we have to iterate the functions, and it may be too costly for if we do not restrict the family of functions that we iterate. Then there is the problem of the filter detection. So in Astray we use pattern matching because we know that the filters are implemented this way, but we can be a lot more generic, and we can use symbolic propagation. Sorry, I missed the exact word. It's symbolic term propagations that has been introduced by Antoine Minet, which allow to record which affectation assignment have been made before and which rebuild the term after. So if the iteration is split into several assignments, this method allows us to rebuild the whole term and to recognize a filter iterations. So this framework was required to achieve the goal of full certifications in the software that we analyze with Astray. That's it. So thank you.
Two questions. First, to get your historical form
Of the in that part of it, it seemed to me that you had to commute the pluses to be able to get it into the nice summation form, and that.
Yeah. So I consider any combination.
Okay, and so in that case, if you commute the pluses, that would not work with the floating point numbers. So, is the reason that it works that you first?
There is two parts. We first have floating point number expressions that are abstracted by real number expressions, and once we are in the real field, we can commute.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Right. Okay, good. And then the other question was on your slide that showed the curve where you increase the capital N and right that one. How come it goes up and then down before it?
Because we have a bound that decreases exponentially, but it is a bound. So there is a lot of chaotic things that happen. We know that there is an exponential bound.
Question?
Can you recall so the set of properties that you can verify?
Mm-hmm.
What are the properties exactly that you can consider with this framework?
With digital filtering?
Well, no, sorry, I meant the Astray in general.
So we prove the absence of out-of-bound accesses.
Yes.
Numerical overflows.
Yes.
Not a number or division by zero.
And so have you tried other properties? I mean, their need when the people, you engineers that.
You mean functional?
Are there other properties that?
Yes, there are functional properties, but it's in the work in progress. No, it's not done yet. Of course, the specification is not only the absence of runtime error. You want to prove that your program makes what you have in mind. But,
Question. Do you have any actually, which is the amount of knowledge about the internal way of working of Astray that the engineer must know in order to use Astray? So what he knows about it? does not know, for instance, about the concretization function, about
So the problem is that we have not many end users. So our end user have read a few papers, but I think that their knowledge is I think that other engineers can use Astray.
Okay, so what do you have to know about the abstract domain, about what a number of...
So typically they run Astray with default parameters and it works. So the only problem is that if you need an extra abstract domain, and that only us can do it. They cannot write an abstract domain. So, but I think they can use Astray without a deep knowledge about abstract interpretation.
Question? Okay, so Jerome will be there until tomorrow, so if you want to schedule a meeting with him, let me know. I come to this class. Thank you.
Okay.